When someone spends years telling the world to take responsibility for their life, people listen. But when that same person disappears, struggles, or changes, the world starts asking questions, not out of gossip, but out of concern. October 2025 isn't just another date on the calendar. For millions who followed Jordan Peterson's work, it represents a moment of reflection on resilience, on vulnerability, and on what it really means to confront chaos when it shows up in your own body and mind. This isn't a story about rumors or speculation. It's about what we can responsibly understand, why people care so deeply, and what this moment says about the human cost of carrying meaning for so many others. So today, let's talk clearly, carefully, and honestly about the October 2025 Jordan Peterson health update and why it matters far beyond one man. When a public figure becomes a symbol, the line between concern and intrusion blurs in ways that are difficult to untangle. Jordan Peterson is not simply an academic or a speaker to millions of people. He has become a stand-in for ideas about responsibility, meaning, order, and the difficult task of confronting suffering without collapsing into resentment. Because of that symbolic weight, any shift in his public presence, whether it's a pause, a silence, or a change in tone, invites widespread attention. What might be a private health matter for most people becomes almost automatically a public conversation. Not because the individual has asked for it, but because meaning attracts attention, and attention rarely knows where to stop. Public concern often begins in a genuine place. People who have listened to lectures, read books, or found guidance during personal crisis feel a sense of gratitude that is not abstract. For them, concern is not about curiosity or entertainment, it's about care. They feel connected to the voice that helped them articulate their own suffering, and when that voice falters or changes, it creates unease. That unease turns into questions, and questions quickly turn into speculation when clear information is limited. In this way, concern can quietly transform into something less noble, even when it doesn't intend to. At the same time, private reality does not scale with public attention. Illness, recovery, and vulnerability are intensely personal experiences. They involve fear, uncertainty, and limits that are difficult to explain even to close family, let alone to millions of strangers. A public figure may feel an obligation to clarify, reassure, or update, but that obligation competes with a basic human need for privacy and dignity. The body does not care about reputation, and suffering does not become easier because people are watching. In fact, it often becomes heavier. This tension creates a moral problem that modern media is poorly equipped to handle. Platforms reward immediacy, certainty, and emotional intensity. Health, however, is rarely immediate or certain, and it does not unfold in clean narratives. When updates are partial or cautious, they are often interpreted as evasive. When silence appears, it is filled with theories. The public conversation begins to drift away from concern and toward ownership, as if the audience is owed access simply because they care. But caring does not automatically grant entitlement. There is also an uncomfortable contradiction at play. Much of Jordan Peterson's work emphasizes personal responsibility, honesty, and confronting suffering directly. Because of this, some people expect absolute transparency, as though advocating responsibility eliminates the right to boundaries. This expectation misunderstands the very principle it claims to defend. Responsibility does not mean self-exposure without limits. It means acting truthfully within what is appropriate, sustainable, and humane. Demanding full disclosure from someone during a vulnerable period may feel aligned with truth-seeking, but it can easily become a form of pressure disguised as principle. Public concern also reveals something deeper about the audience itself. When a thinker becomes influential, people often project stability onto them. They become an anchor, someone who has it together, someone who can be relied upon when things fall apart. A health struggle disrupts that image. It forces people to confront the fact that insight does not grant immunity, and wisdom does not override biology. For some, this realization is unsettling. It can feel like betrayal, even though no promise was broken. The discomfort then seeks an outlet, and speculation provides one. Private reality, however, remains stubbornly resistant to these projections. It is messy, nonlinear, and often boring in the most frustrating way. Recovery is rarely dramatic. It involves repetition, setbacks, and waiting. None of this translates well into headlines or viral clips, yet this is where most of life actually happens. The gap between that reality and public expectation creates frustration on both sides. The audience wants clarity and reassurance, while the individual needs space and time. There is also a risk that constant public concern unintentionally reduces a person to their struggle. When health becomes the dominant lens through which someone is viewed, everything else they are or have done fades into the background. This can feel dehumanizing, even when the attention is sympathetic. A person becomes an update, a status, a question mark. Ironically, this is the opposite of what genuine concern should achieve. Navigating this tension responsibly requires restraint from the public and courage from the individual. Restraint means resisting the urge to speculate, amplify rumors, or demand answers that may not exist yet. It means accepting uncertainty without filling the silence with noise. Courage, on the other hand, means acknowledging limits honestly when it is possible to do so without turning vulnerability into performance. Neither side does this perfectly, but the attempt matters. Ultimately, the divide between public concern and private reality is not a flaw unique to one figure. It is a feature of modern visibility. The question is not whether people will care, but how they will care. Will concern remain grounded in respect, or will it drift into entitlement? Will private reality be allowed the dignity of complexity, or will it be forced into simplified narratives for public consumption? How we answer those questions says as much about us as it does about the person at the center of attention. Responsibility is easy to admire when life is stable. It sounds noble, even inspiring when spoken from a place of strength. But responsibility reveals its true weight when circumstances turn hostile, when the body resists, the mind falters, or control slips away despite best efforts. Personal adversity exposes the difference between responsibility as an idea and responsibility as a lived burden. It forces a confrontation with limits, and that confrontation is rarely clean or heroic. There is a widespread misunderstanding that responsibility means dominance over one situation at all times. When adversity appears, this misunderstanding collapses. Illness, exhaustion, and psychological strain do not respond to discipline alone. You cannot negotiate with biology using willpower, and you cannot reason your way out of every form of suffering. Yet responsibility does not disappear in these moments. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, narrower, and more difficult. Instead of mastering the world, responsibility turns inward, focusing on what can still be done without pretending that everything is under control. One of the hardest truths to accept is that taking responsibility does not guarantee protection from collapse. In fact, people who carry a strong sense of responsibility often push themselves longer and harder than they should. They endure stress silently, believing that stepping back is equivalent to failure. When adversity finally forces a pause, it can feel like a personal moral defeat rather than a biological or situational necessity. This internal conflict can be more painful than the adversity itself. Responsibility under personal adversity also involves renegotiating identity. Many people define themselves by their output, their reliability, or their ability to carry weight for others. When health or circumstances interfere with those roles, the loss is not merely practical, it is existential. The question shifts from, what should I do? To, who am I if I can't do what I used to? Responsibility then includes the uncomfortable task of letting go of an old self-image without collapsing into shame. There is also a social dimension to this burden. When someone is known for advocating strength, discipline, or meaning, adversity invites judgment. Both external and internal. Outsiders may interpret struggle as hypocrisy, as though insight should function as armor. Internally, the individual may replay those judgments, holding themselves to an impossible standard. Responsibility becomes tangled with self-criticism, and compassion feels undeserved. This is where responsibility risks turning into cruelty, aimed inward rather than outward. True responsibility under adversity requires distinguishing between accountability and punishment. Accountability asks, what is within my control right now? Punishment asks, how have I failed? The first leads to adaptation, the second leads to paralysis. In moments of personal struggle, responsibility might mean resting instead of pushing, asking for help instead of giving it, or narrowing focus to survival rather than achievement. These choices can feel like betrayals of principle, but they are often expressions of it. Another overlooked aspect of responsibility is honesty. Adversity strips away the luxury of vague thinking. Pretending to be stronger than you are delays recovery and deepens damage. Yet honesty has costs, especially for those in the public eye or those who are relied upon by others. Admitting limitation can feel like letting people down. Responsibility then involves deciding how much truth can be shared without causing harm, neither hiding behind silence nor exposing vulnerability recklessly. There is also responsibility toward others that persists even when personal capacity shrinks. This does not mean continuing at full intensity, but it does mean recognizing the impact of one's actions and absences. Silence communicates something. Withdrawal creates narratives, whether intended or not. Responsibility in this context means acting deliberately rather than reactively, even when energy is limited. It means choosing the least harmful option, not the ideal one. Importantly, responsibility under adversity challenges the simplistic idea that suffering is always meaningful in a neat or immediate way. Sometimes adversity does not teach, it simply hurts. Responsibility, then, is not about extracting lessons on demand, but about enduring without becoming bitter or dishonest, meaning, if it appears, often does so later, after distance has softened the pain. Expecting clarity in the middle of struggle is another form of unnecessary pressure. There is also a collective lesson embedded here. When we observe others facing adversity, especially those who speak about responsibility, we are tempted to turn their struggle into a test case. We ask whether they live up to their own standards. This instinct says more about our desire for consistency than about moral truth. Responsibility is not a performance measured by spectators. It is a process negotiated privately, often imperfectly. Recognizing this protects us from cynicism. Ultimately, responsibility under personal adversity is not about maintaining an image of strength. It is about refusing to abandon agency entirely, even when agency is reduced to small choices. Getting through the day honestly, not lying about capacity, not turning suffering into an excuse for cruelty, not turning ideals into weapons against oneself. These are modest acts, but they are real. In this sense, adversity does not invalidate responsibility. It reveals its most human form. Not grand, not inspiring in the conventional sense, but grounded, restrained, and deeply difficult. This is where responsibility stops being a slogan and becomes a practice, one measured not by triumph, but by integrity under pressure. Intellectual strength is often mistaken for resilience. The ability to articulate ideas clearly, analyze complex problems, and offer frameworks for meaning can create the impression of unshakable stability. When someone speaks with precision and confidence about chaos, suffering, and responsibility, it is easy to assume that these qualities also protect them from being overwhelmed by those very forces. But resilience is not an extension of intelligence, and insight does not function as armor. Beyond intellectual strength lies a different, quieter form of endurance, one that cannot be reasoned into existence. Intellectual strength operates in the realm of abstraction. It organizes experience, gives language to pain, and helps people orient themselves in the world. This is powerful, but it has limits. The body does not respond to arguments, and the nervous system does not negotiate with ideas. When stress becomes chronic, when illness disrupts sleep, appetite, or emotional regulation, intellectual clarity can remain intact while the capacity to cope erodes. This creates a disorienting gap, understanding what is happening without being able to stop it. That gap is where many people experience shame. If you can explain suffering but cannot escape it, it feels like a personal contradiction. The mind says one thing, the body another. This can lead to the false conclusion that failure to handle it is a moral flaw rather than a physiological or psychological limit. Resilience beyond intellectual strength begins with abandoning that conclusion. It requires accepting that comprehension does not equal control. There is also a cultural bias toward valuing cognitive resilience over embodied resilience. We admire those who can think their way through adversity, who remain articulate under pressure, who frame hardship in meaningful terms. Less visible but equally important is the resilience required to endure confusion, exhaustion, and emotional volatility without a coherent narrative. This form of resilience looks unimpressive from the outside. It often involves silence, withdrawal, and repetition. It does not produce quotable insights, but it keeps a person alive and intact. Beyond intellectual strength, resilience becomes relational. When cognitive tools are exhausted, people rely on routines, support systems, and environments that reduce demand rather than increase it. This can feel like regression to someone accustomed to self-sufficiency. Accepting help, simplifying life, or stepping back from roles of authority may feel like weakness. In reality, these are adaptive strategies, ways of conserving energy when resources are depleted. Resilience here is not about standing firm, it is about bending without breaking. Another overlooked aspect is emotional resilience, which does not always align with intellectual coherence. Emotions can lag behind understanding. A person may know that a situation is temporary, manageable, or explainable, and still feel fear, despair, or anger. Intellectual insight does not erase those reactions. Resilience means allowing emotions to exist without demanding that they resolve immediately. It means tolerating discomfort without forcing meaning onto it prematurely. There is also humility embedded in resilience beyond intellect. Intellectual strength often comes with identity. People are praised for their minds, their clarity, their ability to guide others. When that identity is disrupted by vulnerability, it can feel like losing one's footing. Resilience then involves releasing the need to be the one who knows, the one who explains, the one who leads. It means becoming a participant in suffering rather than an interpreter of it. This shift is deeply uncomfortable, but it is often necessary. Physical resilience plays a role here as well. Sleep, nutrition, movement, and rest are not philosophical concerns, yet they underpin the ability to cope. Intellectual cultures tend to downplay these basics, treating them as secondary to insight. But when physical systems are strained, no amount of understanding compensates. Resilience beyond intellect acknowledges the primacy of the body and works with it rather than against it. Importantly, this form of resilience cannot be rushed. Intellectual problem solving seeks solutions. Embodied resilience often requires patience. Recovery does not follow arguments, it follows rhythms. This clashes with the expectation that clarity should produce quick improvement. When it doesn't, frustration grows. Resilience then involves resisting the urge to escalate effort when rest is required or to force progress when stabilization is the real goal. There is also a lesson here for those observing from the outside. We often expect thinkers and speakers to model invulnerability as though their insights should shield them from breakdown. This expectation dehumanizes them. Resilience beyond intellectual strength reminds us that no one escapes the basic constraints of being human. Insight may help others, but it does not suspend biology, history, or accumulated stress. Ultimately, resilience beyond intellectual strength is not about transcending weakness, but about coexisting with it. It is about staying oriented when clarity fades, maintaining basic integrity when higher-level functioning is compromised, and choosing not to turn suffering into self-contempt. It is slower, less visible, and far less celebrated than intellectual resilience, but it is often the kind that matters most. This deeper resilience does not contradict intellectual strength, it completes it. It grounds insight in reality and reminds us that understanding life is not the same as being able to withstand it effortlessly. When intellect reaches its limits, resilience continues, not through brilliance, but through endurance. Media narratives do not simply report events, they shape the way those events are understood. When health enters the picture, especially the health of a well-known figure, the space between facts and interpretation widens quickly. Information becomes fragmented, timelines blur, and speculation fills the gaps. In this environment, misinformation rarely arrives as an obvious lie. More often, it emerges through emphasis, omission, and repetition, slowly solidifying into a story that feels coherent even when it is incomplete or inaccurate. Modern media operates on incentives that are poorly aligned with medical reality. Health is complex, slow, and uncertain, while media rewards speed, clarity, and emotional impact. Updates are expected before they are available. Conclusions are drawn before processes unfold. When journalists, commentators, or online personalities lack direct access to reliable information, they often rely on secondary signals. Absence from public view, changes in tone, second-hand remarks. These fragments are then arranged into narratives that appear plausible but rest on unstable foundations. Once a narrative forms, it becomes self-reinforcing. Headlines echo each other. Social media posts cite previous speculation as if it were confirmation. The original uncertainty is forgotten, replaced by confidence built on repetition. This is how misinformation gains traction without requiring malicious intent. Many participants believe they are informing others, warning them, or filling in blanks responsibly. Yet the end result is often distortion. A particularly powerful driver of misinformation is the demand for moral framing. Audiences want stories with lessons, redemption, downfall, hypocrisy, triumph. Health struggles resist these templates. They are rarely linear and often lack clear resolution. To satisfy narrative hunger, complexity is compressed. Causes are simplified. Responsibility is exaggerated or denied entirely. The person at the center of the story becomes either a cautionary tale or a symbol of perseverance, regardless of whether reality supports either role. Media narratives also struggle with ambiguity. Silence is uncomfortable, especially in an attention economy. When official updates are limited or cautious, silence is interpreted as concealment. This interpretation may be unfair, but it is predictable. In the absence of information, speculation is treated as participation. Those who refrain from commenting are drowned out by those who confidently assert. Over time, confidence is mistaken for credibility. Another issue is the collapse of boundaries between reporting and commentary. Analysis blends into opinion, which blends into conjecture. A question posed rhetorically is later quoted as an implied answer. Language such as raises concerns, sparks questions, or prompts speculation allows misinformation to circulate without direct claims being made. The narrative advances while accountability remains diffuse. Social media accelerates this process by rewarding emotional resonance over accuracy. Content that triggers fear, outrage, or sympathy spreads faster than content that emphasizes uncertainty or restraint. Algorithms amplify what engages, not what is careful. As a result, the most extreme interpretations often dominate visibility, even if they are statistically unlikely or poorly supported. Misinformation becomes not just widespread, but normalized. There is also a personalization problem. When media narratives focus heavily on an individual's health, they risk reducing that person to a condition or crisis. This invites amateur diagnosis, armchair psychology, and definitive claims from people with no access to medical context. Even well-meaning audiences begin to speak with unwarranted certainty. Over time, speculation hardens into assumed knowledge, and corrections, if they appear at all, struggle to catch up. Importantly, misinformation does not only harm the subject of the narrative, it affects public understanding of health more broadly. Simplistic stories reinforce myths about recovery, resilience, and control. They suggest that health outcomes are the direct result of character ideology or isolated decisions. This distorts reality and fosters judgment rather than understanding. It also pressures others facing similar struggles to conform to unrealistic expectations. The responsibility for this environment is shared. Media outlets have a duty to distinguish clearly between verified information and interpretation. Commentators have a duty to signal uncertainty honestly. Audiences have a duty to resist the urge to treat speculation as insight. None of these duties are consistently upheld, not because of malice, but because restraint is rarely rewarded. There is also a deeper cultural discomfort at play. Unresolved health situations remind people of vulnerability and lack of control. Misinformation provides psychological relief by imposing order on uncertainty. A flawed explanation can feel better than no explanation at all. Media narratives exploit this tendency, often unconsciously, by offering closure where none exists. Resisting misinformation requires accepting discomfort. It means allowing stories to remain unfinished, acknowledging what is unknown, and resisting the urge to fill silence with certainty. This is difficult in a media landscape designed to punish patience. Yet without this restraint, narratives drift further from reality, and concern turns into distortion. Ultimately, media narratives are powerful not because they are accurate, but because they are compelling. Misinformation thrives when storytelling outpaces verification. Recognizing this does not require cynicism, only awareness. Health is not a spectacle, and uncertainty is not a failure of explanation. When media treats both as problems to be solved rather than realities to be respected, misinformation becomes inevitable. Learning to distinguish between information and narrative is not just a media skill. It is an ethical one. How we talk about health, especially the health of others, reveals whether we value truth over coherence and dignity over drama. Health has a way of dismantling illusions quietly and without asking permission. It interrupts plans, challenges identities, and exposes assumptions we rarely question when things are going well. When health becomes fragile, limits are no longer theoretical. They are felt in the body, in energy levels, in attention span, and in emotional resilience. One of the first lessons this reveals is that human capacity is finite, even when purpose is strong and intentions are good. Ignoring this truth does not make it disappear, it only delays the reckoning. Modern culture often treats limits as temporary obstacles rather than structural realities. We are encouraged to push through discomfort, optimize performance, and treat rest as a reward rather than a requirement. Health challenges disrupt this narrative. They force a confrontation with the fact that some limits are not negotiable. Sleep cannot be skipped indefinitely. Stress cannot be absorbed endlessly. The nervous system does not respond to ambition. Recognizing limits is not defeat, it is the beginning of sustainability. Another lesson is that health is not purely individual. While personal choices matter, they exist within biological, psychological, and environmental constraints. Genetics, past experiences, cumulative stress, and chance all play roles that cannot be fully controlled. This realization complicates simplistic moral judgments about illness and recovery. It undermines the idea that good outcomes are always earned and bad outcomes are always deserved. Health humbles certainty and invites compassion, both for others and for oneself. Limits also reshape the meaning of strength. Strength is often imagined as expansion, doing more, carrying more, enduring more. Health challenges suggest a different model. Strength may involve contraction, reducing commitment, simplifying life, and conserving energy. It may involve saying no without justification, resting without guilt, and prioritizing stability over growth. This form of strength is less visible and less celebrated, but it is often the difference between recovery and collapse. There is also a lesson about patience. Health rarely responds to urgency. Healing unfolds at its own pace, indifferent to deadlines and expectations. This can be deeply frustrating, especially for those accustomed to progress through effort. Patience here is not passive, it is disciplined waiting. It involves following routines, tolerating uncertainty, and resisting the urge to force outcomes. Learning patience through health is uncomfortable, but it recalibrates one's relationship with time and control. Limits imposed by health also expose how much identity is tied to function. People often define themselves by productivity, reliability, or influence. When health interferes with these roles, a void appears. This can feel like loss of self rather than loss of capacity. One of the hardest lessons, then, is separating worth from output. Health challenges invite a reevaluation of identity that is not contingent on constant contribution. This is not an abstract philosophical exercise, it is an emotional reckoning. Another lesson concerns communication and honesty. Health forces conversations that are often avoided about vulnerability, dependency, and uncertainty. It challenges the habit of presenting a curated version of oneself to the world. At the same time, it teaches discernment. Not everything needs to be shared, and not everyone needs to know everything. Learning where honesty helps and where privacy protects is a subtle but important skill. Health also teaches that progress is rarely linear. Improvement often comes with setbacks, plateaus, and regressions. This contradicts narratives of steady upward movement. Accepting nonlinearity reduces panic when things worsen temporarily and prevents overconfidence when things improve. It encourages a long-term perspective that values trends over moments. This lesson extends beyond health into how people approach growth, change, and failure more broadly. There is a lesson here about attention as well. Health challenges narrow focus. They strip away distractions and reveal what truly matters when energy is limited. Relationships, basic routines, and small pleasures take on disproportionate importance. Many ambitions that once felt urgent lose their grip. This reordering of priorities is not always chosen, but it can be clarifying. It reveals how much of life is structured around excess rather than necessity. Limits also cultivate empathy. Experiencing constraint firsthand alters how one perceives others' struggles. Judgment softens when effort no longer guarantees outcome. Patience increases when delays are unavoidable. Health teaches that behind most visible behaviors are invisible battles. This awareness does not excuse everything, but it deepens understanding. It replaces simplistic explanations with curiosity. Finally, health lessons point toward humanity itself. To be human is to be vulnerable to forces beyond reason and intention. Bodies age, minds falter, and certainty erodes. Health challenges make this impossible to ignore. Yet within this vulnerability lies a different kind of meaning, not the meaning of dominance or control, but the meaning of care, restraint, and mutual dependence. Limits do not negate purpose, they redefine it. They shift focus from endless expansion to careful stewardship of what remains. Health teaches that life is not about maximizing every dimension at once, but about aligning effort with reality. In learning to respect limits, people often discover a quieter, more durable form of humanity, one that values presence over performance and integrity over endurance at all costs. As we step back from everything discussed, one truth becomes unavoidable. This story was never just about a health update, a date on a calendar, or even one individual. It is about what happens when human vulnerability collides with public meaning. It is about how easily concern turns into speculation, how responsibility becomes heavier under pressure, how intellect reaches limits the body refuses to ignore, how narratives outrun facts, and how health quietly teaches lessons no theory can replace. What we've examined is not a fall from principle, but a confrontation with reality. Responsibility does not disappear in adversity, it transforms. Strength does not vanish when limits appear, it is redefined. And meaning does not collapse when certainty fades, it deepens if we allow it to. The temptation is always to demand clarity, closure, and clean explanations. But life, especially where health is concerned, rarely offers those on our timeline. Perhaps the most important takeaway is restraint. Restraint in judgment. Restraint in speculation. Restraint in turning someone else's struggle into a symbol we can argue over. Concern grounded in respect is different from curiosity fueled by noise. One preserves dignity, the other erodes it. This moment invites us to reconsider how we engage with public figures' ideas, and even our own expectations. Insight does not grant immunity. Responsibility does not guarantee control. And suffering does not invalidate meaning. If anything, it exposes the cost of carrying it. In the end, the most honest response to uncertainty is not certainty, but humility, to acknowledge what we do not know, to allow recovery to be private when it must be, to remember that behind every public role is a body, a nervous system, and a finite human being. If there is a lesson worth carrying forward, it is this: integrity is not proven by never struggling, but by refusing to turn struggle into spectacle, either for ourselves or for others. And perhaps that understanding matters far more than any update ever could.